You're listening to All Hands on Tech. Come along as we get to know the people and businesses behind the province's ever-expanding tech sector.
Each episode, we'll chat with local experts to uncover the hidden gems that make Nova Scotia a hub for collaboration, innovation, and creativity.
All Hands on Tech is proudly produced by Digital Nova Scotia, the industry association for Nova Scotia's growing tech sector. Hey, welcome back to another episode of All Hands on Tech. I'm your host, Eilish, and today we're diving into a topic that is more relevant than ever before: privacy, technology, and the law. As the tech sector here in Nova Scotia continues to grow, so do the conversations around data protection, cybersecurity, and how businesses can innovate responsibly. So joining me to have that conversation is one of Canada's leading internet technology and privacy lawyers and a partner at McInnes Cooper here in Halifax. David Fraser works with everyone from local startups to Fortune 100 companies, helping them navigate complex privacy laws and tackle challenges like cross-border data flows and cloud computing. He's also a trusted voice in the media on privacy issues and teaches law and technology at Dalhousie University. But that's not all. This list does go on. David is also a dedicated member of Digital Nova Scotia's board, playing a key role in supporting and strengthening our province's tech ecosystem. David, that long introduction, very much deserved. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you with this. I mean, there's so much going on in innovation, in technology, and of course, then the legal side of it all. We're having all of those kinds of conversations, so we're going to jump into that. But first, I want to ask you just a couple quick icebreakers before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff. Okay, first one being, what is a tech gadget or app that you personally feel like you can't live without, but you also secretly maybe worry a little bit privacy-wise? Or because of what you do for work, does that not exist?
Certainly, I probably see privacy in places that other people might not. But ironically, I'm pretty active on social media.
Okay.
That you know, I think anybody who thinks about it, and everybody should think about it, kind of, what are you sharing in particular, and things like that. I probably use my privacy settings more than some other people with respect to their particular posts, but I'm really interested in keeping up with what a whole bunch of friends, particularly kind of friends around the world, are doing. And I'm an avid photographer, and so if I take a picture of something that I think is worth sharing, I'm going to share it right away, and those sorts of things. So yeah, everything on the social side is something that I really enjoy being a consumer of, but I've also been kind of an active contributor to.
Okay, interesting. I was going to ask that, if like the social media side, are you over there reading like your terms and conditions? Okay, good to know. What is your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
After a busy day, this is probably a COVID thing, or where it really ticked up during COVID. I spend a whole lot of time watching videos on YouTube.
Do you?
Like a huge variety of them. And so I'll crack open a beer, and I find that the algorithm knows me really quite well. Maybe it's the volume of of selections that I put into it. Okay. But there's always something interesting to watch, and it's not super long. And so, and some of it is not super intensive. So I can be cleaning up the kitchen, I can be getting dinner ready, I can be doing those sorts of things. But there's just a huge amount of stuff to learn, and there's other stuff that's just kind of entertaining. I don't think I've undertaken it like a single DIY project in the last 5 years that didn't start with watching five people do the exact same thing on YouTube.
I have to say, the way that the internet has gone, and I feel like it's a little bit more recently as well, that just that educational route, that, seeing somebody else complete this task, maybe in a different way, maybe in the same way, I find it really fascinating that's a whole side of the internet that people are really appreciating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find people learn in completely different ways. Mm-hmm. And so I have family members who don't learn that sort of way. It's like, I'll say, well, just pull up a video and show you exactly. It's like, no, that's not how they learn. They need, I don't know, like IKEA type instructions, or they need something else like that. But for me, that's I like to watch somebody do something first, and then I'll try it, and I'm better at it as a result, or at least I think so, than doing it blind. Yeah, like I have like shelves or books on my shelf related to all sorts of things, related to kind of photography, videography, related to kind of home improvement, stuff like that. I've hardly cracked those anymore, because all that information you can now find on the internet.
Oh my gosh,
and there's so many people out there kind of sharing interesting knowledge. Yeah. Some of them may be doing it for the revenue, monetized videos and things like that, but there's just this whole kind of culture of information sharing out there that's just pretty remarkable.
Yeah. One of my favorite accounts this shouldn't be taking this long, but I want to tell one of my favorite accounts on TikTok of all places, which I'm sure is a bit of a red flag to somebody like yourself, but it's this, probably middle-aged man who is known as the dad of TikTok. And literally all it is kind of those like everyday life skills that somebody who maybe doesn't have a present father figure in their lives, he's just walking you through how to do them, how to change a tire, how to change your oil, like just very silly kind of mundane things. But the following count, it's there. People are taking it all in.
Yeah,
They're loving it.
Adulting 101. That's,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yep, that's exactly it. Okay, so in my intro, I kind of alluded to some of your many, many jobs. I don't know how you found the time to even come speak with me today, but which of those many jobs is your favorite and why?
Oh, it's my legal practice. I'm one of the happiest lawyers I know. And I know quite a few happy lawyers. I really enjoy what I do. I really enjoy the environment in which everything kind of plays out. It's never the same day twice. It's always really interesting questions, and because many of them have never been answered before, some of them have never been asked before, that it really takes, at least I think, a level of creativity to be able to say, okay, well, here's this new thing. Do we need new law, or can we just kind of zoom out a little bit and understand like this has to fit within the existing frameworks that we have, otherwise we're going to have to build a new framework. And so it's that creative problem solving for clients. And I also try not to be the lawyer who just says, no, you can't do that. It's like, okay, well, what do you want to accomplish? And let's find the best path to do that within your kind of risk parameters and your comfort levels.
Interesting. Okay. I'm a little disappointed that your first answer wasn't being a board member on DNS, but that's okay. We won't hold it against you. Okay, that's it for my icebreakers, and that's actually a perfect segue that you did say that your law practice is in fact your favorite, because my first question is, how did you actually even get started in law, and then specifically tech law? What is your founding story essentially?
Yeah, and it goes back quite a ways. I've always been interested in technology, always been interested in kind of just things, taking them apart, putting them back together, and not that I'm super talented at anything like that, but there in fact was kind of a path through high school where I was thinking of going into computer science. Okay. Didn't do well in calculus, and so went on the arts route, but always remained interested in tech. And in fact, in my first week of my undergrad, in my arts program, I was given a Unix account at the University of British Columbia, and discovered, and like this is 1989, 1990, this kind of pre-web internet of news groups, of some beginnings of like kind of things like Archie and Veronica are probably not going to mean anything to a large number of listeners, but discovered this ability, and I could, for example, send an email to somebody at a completely different university. It didn't look like a normal email that we know it now. And I thought, well, this is absolutely amazing. And also got access to international news. My parents were living overseas at the time. And it's like, oh my God. And so I was just kind of taken up with the internet. There was a whole lot of discussion that was going on back then about what sort of impact the internet was going to have on society, what sort of, and how we could stop society from having an impact on the internet. It was a pretty kind of early cyber libertarian sort of age. And so I was just really, really interested in that intersection or possible collision between technology and society. But that was always just kind of a hobby. So I was on bulletin boards and on the early internet and using Usenet and things like that. Continued, did an arts degree in history. We moved to Nova Scotia for my wife's work. And I thought, okay, do I want to go into law, or do I want? And I really enjoyed history, so I did a master's at St. Mary's. And kind of during that time, thought, okay, no, I want to go to law school. And always thought it'd be really cool to do technology law, but also was really in love with Nova Scotia. And did not imagine that I could do technology law living in Nova Scotia. And during the process, when you're in law school, there's kind of interviews for summer jobs and things like that. And I met a lawyer and discovered he had a technology practice. He was doing venture capital work during the first kind of .com boom. Okay. And there was this whole technology-based community in Nova Scotia that I had no idea existed because you weren't reading about them in the newspaper. It was just there. And through him, I thought, well, I don't want your practice because I don't want to do venture capital sort of stuff, but I want to work with your clients. And had an opportunity to work with him. And discovered, there was the possibility to kind of pursue that dream. I assumed I'd have to go to San Francisco or Boston or New York or someplace like that to do that, but I wanted to stay in Nova Scotia. And then the timing was also pretty perfect in terms of, so I was called to the bar in 2001. Okay. And that's when our federal privacy law first came into effect. And I'd studied it during law school. And it was going to come fully into effect in 2004. And there wasn't anybody, at least in the Maritimes, who was focused on that. And so I'm at a fantastic firm, McInnes Cooper. I went to the managing partner and said, look, there's this law that's coming into effect. It's going to affect all of our clients in the next little bit. I know something about it. And they gave me all the resources that I wanted in order to kind of go out and get in front of our clients, to tell them what the issues were, to tell them the things that they had to do, which was just a fantastic experience for a junior lawyer. I don't think many firms are kind of that supportive of young lawyers in that sort of way, like giving them
Sure,
that
yeah.
sort of opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I've been able to live in, I think, the best part of the world, and I've lived around the world, and work with some really cool people who are doing really cool things. And at this stage, a lot of my work is for kind of international companies that are based in Silicon Valley or that are in Europe, and they're creating some really fascinating products and having to deal with translating European law to Canadian law to American law and things like that, and requiring that sort of assistance. So that's what led me where I am today.
Wow. So what started as a little bit of a hobby has now turned into, was this huge passion project, and now here you are, you're continuing that mission. I find it interesting that the idea of little Nova Scotia, we can't do that here. We're not doing that here. And I feel like we're kind of still almost stuck in a little bit of that. I call it Nova Scotia humble, that we do amazing things here, and people, we don't want to brag about ourselves. And so that conversation isn't necessarily happening, but you're proof that it absolutely is, and will continue. Right.
Well, and you think about, like, we're super well positioned in a bunch of ways. We're halfway between the West Coast and Europe, and so, I, in the course of a day, I'm dealing with people in California and people in Seattle, and I'm also dealing with people in London and Brussels, and it doesn't inconvenience me in any significant sort of way. It's just, you're on the West Coast. Well, why don't we have a meeting during your morning, and that'll be during my afternoon, and everything kind of works out. And there's really good connections between Nova Scotia and the rest of the world, and that's improving probably every month in terms of aircraft connection. But these days, like, I've been doing kind of remote work in the sense of, like, remote video conferences with clients around the world for years, kind of pre-pandemic, and now all of a sudden that's just the way things are. I'm actually thankfully traveling less. That more and more things, people have just gotten used to this sort of new normal.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a silver lining, especially for, the digital landscape, if there's a silver lining that we can take from COVID, it is absolutely that. Just that means of connection is available basically anytime, anywhere. And it's, I mean, it's great. It's great even on, like, a personal level, for you saw all the families that got to, connect and still get to, but then also obviously the business side of things as well. Okay, so I mean, we are, Nova Scotia here, our tech sector really is growing rapidly. We saw quite the boom in these last couple of years. I think it is going to continue. We're looking at, a labor market landscape that is a positive one in the tech sector, at least. We've got startups and established companies alike, both leveraging that data-driven technology option, like we were just kind of discussing. But of course, with that comes some challenges, and those privacy challenges specifically is what you can kind of speak to. Are there any specific privacy challenges that you are encountering when it comes to kind of that boom in technology that we're seeing? I'm sure yes is the answer.
Yeah, certainly. Any new technology brings new questions, and how are those answered, and how are the regulators going to approach it? So you think, what's the latest big thing that's having a huge impact? It's artificial intelligence. And currently there's an investigation by the Privacy Commissioner into OpenAI, and I'm co-counsel for them on that, related to, well, how is the Privacy Commissioner going to approach this? That large language models ingest a lot of information, but they don't really care about whether it's personal information. It could be about Daffy Duck, or it could be about David Fraser. And so we have this kind of level of uncertainty with respect to that, and there's a whole kind of IP issues as well, and so anything that's new and disruptive is going to kind of cause people to scratch their heads and think, well, how does this fit within it? And also from where I'm sitting, because I do a lot of work with non-Canadian companies and work with non-Canadian lawyers, it's like, well, how do we make our regulatory environment as close as possible to our major trading partners, so that kind of having to design a product that complies with Canadian laws will also easily comply with the GDPR or will easily comply with what's going on. So you're not creating additional barriers with respect to kind of weirdness. So there's some products that are being actively developed here in Canada that might not actually even fly as a product in Europe because of the rules that they have. And sometimes they're a little bit more restrictive, but I guess often they're more restrictive or more bureaucratic. But we do need to be thinking in Nova Scotia and also in Canada generally about the whole world as our marketplace. And I think that the more that we can do to make Canada maybe even a standard, but one that means that you can build a product in Nova Scotia and you can launch it around the world without having to hire additional squads of lawyers or having to even retool your product.
So ultimately, then it sounds to me like, in your opinion anyway, it would really be beneficial if these laws and whatnot were more of a blanket statement globally than just kind of regionally.
Yeah, just more consistent. So just when Parliament was prorogued in January, that put an end to a number of bills that were in front of Parliament, and one of them was Bill C-27, which included something called the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, which apparently kind of came out of nowhere. There wasn't any consultation on it. Europe was working on an AI Act, and there was an executive order since rescinded in the United States. And it took elements from the European one, which was really well developed and lots of consultation behind it, but did it in enough of a different way that you couldn't assume compatibility. And it's like we really should be working on compatibility of these sorts of things in the same way that we do with other standards related to electrical products and other things. You don't want to create these whole new barriers. But sometimes you get Europe, they do GDPR in 2018. That essentially raises the bar for everyone. We have state privacy laws in the US, which mean it's actually easier for American companies to comply with Canadian privacy laws because now they're having to deal with Vermont and California and Washington State. But we always need to be looking externally because we're a small place and we're a small population, and we do have, because of tech and because of the technology infrastructure, we do have access to global markets.
Absolutely. I mean, that to me just makes sense, that it's the globalization of everything, of course. The world feels so small because of technology. So it would only make sense that, these different startups and whatnot that are creating these products would want to ultimately push them further for growth and for utilization.
That's right.
So yeah, that definitely makes more sense. I mean, things like cyber attacks, we're seeing a lot more of that. They're making headline news these days. It's funny, actually, David, I'm just realizing this, that last night, knowing that you were coming on the show today, I had a bunch of the notifications that I was having suspicious logins from Facebook, my Hotmail account, all those things. So I think somebody knew that we were going to be connecting today. But cyber attacks, they do seem to be on the rise. Data breaches, definitely a growing concern for sure. What advice would you give to tech companies here in Nova Scotia for trying to both prepare but then ultimately respond to these sorts of breaches?
Yeah, I think for any company in the tech space that's building a product, they need to be thinking about cybersecurity and privacy from day one. Certainly in my experience, it's easier to build it in on your product roadmap than it is to try to retrofit it after the fact. And increasingly, we're seeing data incidents where it's a vendor that's compromised and all their customers are affected. And we've seen this a number of times. We've just had the report on the Move It data breach, where the Nova Scotia government was one of thousands of customers of Move It. Move It suffered a zero-day incident that affected huge amounts of information from Nova Scotia, but huge amounts of information from around the world. And anybody looking to contract with a vendor should be going through a due diligence process. And if you're that vendor, you want to make sure that you can pass that due diligence process, and you can pass it with flying colors. You don't want to be the vulnerability. But there's always things that are going to go wrong. You can spend $1 million to protect $1,000 worth of information, and they're always, the more complicated the tech gets, the harder it is. As I said, Move It was a zero-day. They didn't know about the vulnerability that they had until a bad guy found it and exploited it.
Yeah.
And so bad things can go wrong. So you want to be prepared for when that happens. But you also want to proactively kind of mitigate against what consequences that will have. And so increasingly, ransomware has been a big thing. The companies that were hit the hardest were those that did not have kind of offline backups, so they were really quite vulnerable. you end up with kind of once bitten, twice shy, where companies had offline backups and were able to restore more quickly, and then the bad guys were threatening to kind of dump the information on the dark web. So it's this whole kind of cat and mouse game. But you want to invest in, but you also want to make sure, if somebody got in here, are we doing what we can to minimize the harm? Are we kind of segmenting our networks? Are we doing other things? Are we looking at detections of exfiltrations? But you also want to have a plan to respond, because when somebody goes into the office after a long weekend, and very often these seem to happen on a long weekend, or kind of when you least want it, not just when you least expect it, and discovers that they can't log in, that they don't have their systems, that's not the time to be making up a plan. So you want to have a plan in advance. You want to have your team. You want to have people on speed dial. You want external forensic consultants who are familiar with your networks and your systems. And you want to make sure that plan is also printed out.
Yes, you can't just have a digital copy of it.
That's right.
Somewhere.
I've been involved in at least one incident where the incident response plan was on SharePoint. It's like, can't log in.
Oh, jeez. Just adding some complication to an already tough day.
Yeah, and so there's a great something called a tabletop exercise, where you bring together the right people and you go through a kind of a scenario, and you act it out. And through that process, you'll learn who else should have been at the table. Are we prepared for this? Who's the decision maker when it comes to some of these important decisions? This isn't just kind of self-interest. There's legal risk that comes out of that. If it's a significant amount of customer information, you're going to get sued. How can you how can you manage that legal risk from the outset? How can you protect some of these things with privilege? And so I think that just speaks to the benefit of having that team already assembled and kind of ready, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
On the other legal side of that, is there often, we talk about, bad actors getting in there, getting the information and, wanting to or threatening to share it. Is it often that there's actually somebody to go after legally in that situation? Or, we've got, I think of, the overseas foreign scams that happen, that sort of thing. A lot of, the technology scams of, the grandparent scam. Oftentimes it seems like, the victim of that doesn't see justice. Is that kind of the case when we get into those larger, businesses as well?
Yeah, that's certainly on an incident by incident level. I think that's the sense. So it is interesting that so the Canadian federal government is actively trying to increase our cyber policing sort of capacity in terms of it like an active response. One of the problems that exists is that if you are yourself a victim of a crime, who do you call? You call your local police. And does your local police actually have the resources and the skill to take on a complicated cybersecurity sort of thing? And that capacity in Canada is growing, thankfully. So very seldom, I don't think I've ever heard of an incident that I've been involved in, and I've been involved in many, where they found the bad guy and that bad guy ended up in handcuffs. But I've certainly seen instances where the ransomware group associated with an incident from months before, or maybe even years before, has been kind of broken up and through an international policing effort. There's a huge amount of cooperation that takes place at that level that's kind of invisible to most of us. But I've had some opportunities to go to law enforcement conferences and to speak with folks in that community and to see what they're doing. You're never going to really get like that particular bad guy.
Sure.
But there's just so many scams. You talk about kind of the grandparent scam. It's absolutely horrible, the number of people who are actively going after vulnerable individuals and clearing out their bank accounts.
Yes.
It's like we're talking about real victims and real losses and people who are probably thousands and thousands of miles away. We've seen instances where bad guys will get into an email system and will just kind of lurk and wait for the opportunity to send a message to say, oh, look, you're buying this crane for like $500,000 or something. Our wiring instructions have changed, so please wire the funds here. And to be able to catch that as quickly as possible. And the banks are doing as much as they can in order to deal with that sort of wire fraud. It's such a complicated threat environment that I think that most companies really need to put the resources into understanding what the issues are and understanding what their threat position is.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, obviously, that as the technology evolves, those, scams and those threats are just also going to evolve.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and they're also leveraging artificial intelligence that they're, you can, there's AI products where you can change your voice, you can change your accent. And one of the giveaways that's often been has been somebody calls out of the blue with with a non-typical accent, and now that can be changed. There was an incident in Asia with a bank fraud where an AI video way. So that it had to do with the company was having to pay money, and the bank said, I want to talk to essentially the CFO on a video call to have them confirm all this information. And it was a completely fabricated, it looked like the CFO. And so there's just more and more complicated things that as lawyers, the rules we have to deal with for transferring trust funds has become this real requirement for additional diligence, because anybody who has money, they're going to be a target, and the bad guys are just kind of going where the money is.
Yeah. Man, at a certain point, I was like so confident in my, tech skills of, oh no, mom and dad, don't click that email. Like it's, it's a phishing scam and blah, blah, blah. And now there's times that I'm reading through and I'm like, do I know? Like, am I going to get scammed here? Because it is just becoming more and more evolved. It's disappointing that, we have these technologies that are incredible and can be used for incredible things. And yet there are some of those folks that choose to use them for not so incredible things.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's switch gears here a little bit to something a little bit more fun, a little less, bad actor. You yourself are actually all about the technology usage. You've been publishing some articles, recording some fun blogs for your YouTube channel. So I want to talk to you about, what that process is like for you. Tell me a little bit about that channel of yours, what sort of tech you're doing, what kind of conversations. We talk about educational videos a little earlier. That's essentially what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's something that I've found to be really, and I've been doing stuff like that for quite a long time. So, as I said, my interest in tech had me reading a whole bunch of stuff that was available on the internet that I couldn't find otherwise. And I continued to be a technology user through law school and things like that, and found a whole community out there of lawyers who were sharing information related to the areas of law in which they practice, and kind of the first generation of legal bloggers. And I think of somebody like Michael Geist, who's still kind of at the forefront of these sorts of things. He had a blog about technology, law, copyright, and privacy. And so I was getting so much useful information from this, but I was also seeing there was a bit of a community of these bloggers where one blogger would share a link with the other one, say, hey, you should read this is really interesting, kind of, I guess, long form Twitter maybe. And thought, I think I have something to say. And as a lawyer, you're constantly reading stuff, and you're having to keep on top of what's happening. And at the time, at the beginning of my practice, things were happening on a daily basis. And I thought, I can pretty easily, I have to read this case, I can pretty easily summarize it in a paragraph or 3 and post on a blog about why it's significant. Yeah. And I really enjoyed doing that. People would say, well, how do you find the time to do that? And I thought, I'm having to do the reading in any event, and actually kind of writing it down, summarizing it, means it kind of sticks better. So it's just part of my professional development. And that blog was visible around the world. That resulted in, at a pretty junior time in my practice, being invited to speak at the Canadian Bar Association annual conference, where I was on a stage with the Assistant Privacy Commissioner of Canada, because somebody said, oh, there's this guy in Halifax who's writing interesting stuff about these sorts of things. And so that, I guess, gave me a little bit of a profile that I was able to build on. And then the YouTube channel was similar, that during the pandemic I was watching a huge amount of YouTube videos, but I was also having to teach remotely. And that was an interesting experience. And somebody asked me, oh, well, do you have recordings of your classes? Can you share them? It's like, no, I'm a little bit more casual with my students, and I'd be comfortable doing it. But it's like, that made me think there's probably an audience out there. And I was following a number of lawyers on YouTube, but there really wasn't a lot of privacy content out there. I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of an audience out here. And so I started doing it and really enjoyed it. It takes more time than just writing a blog. There's no doubt, but it has meant, so sometimes I'll get a call from a lawyer outside of Canada asking a particular question about, well, how does this work? And I can say, look, I'm happy to explain it, but if you got 20 minutes, it's in this YouTube video.
Nice.
And they do it, and I've been really surprised. Like, I've only got 8,000 subscribers, but they seem to be really great quality subscribers, because the Privacy Commissioner of British Columbia said, oh, I was on a patio the other day and I cracked open a beer and watched your video on this Court of Appeal case. That's kind of good to know.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, let me just brag about you for a second here, because it sounds like you're not going to. You posted a video just one day ago, and it already has 9.4 thousand views. So yes, you have 8.3 thousand subscribers right now. But this is incredible reach. And this is just something that you do in your little home studio, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so I set up a studio in the basement. I already had some pretty good lighting, and also I was having to do court from my dining room, and thought, you gotta look the part, and so upgraded some of my gear, and yeah, the funny thing about if you look at the analytics on my YouTube channel, is that the ones with the biggest number of views are not at all directed at people who I hope become my clients or the watchers. So an overview of Canadian privacy law for non-Canadian lawyers. Hey, please, if you're a non-Canadian lawyer and you need to know, check that out. But things that are funny, things that are controversial. There's a case related that came out of the United States related to the police raiding a rapper's house and taking his key lime pie or something like that. That was my number one kind of video for the longest time. And this one that I just posted, having to do with a group of people called auditors and cop watchers, or people who go into public places and public buildings and police stations, and they kind of aggressively film things and assert their freedom of expression. I've already had a couple of people reach out to me because they want to be represented because they're doing this. I'm a business lawyer, but I do think that people should understand their rights, and people should and also police should understand what people's rights are. And so that's just kind of took off right away. There's a whole bunch of kind of anarchistic stuff in the comments and things like that. But I guess everybody's entitled to my opinion.
All the subscribers anyway. I really do love that though, that I'll be honest, David, before I did my research and came across, your blog and that sort of thing. Blog maybe a little bit less so because I feel like there's a little bit more, kind of protection around that. But definitely, a platform like YouTube, I kind of expected you to have no social media just because of, the kind of presumed threat that we always kind of talk about. So I think it's great that, you're still able to utilize, these different services and different platforms. But I do have to imagine, kind of like you said earlier, that maybe you're maybe a little bit more of a cautious user than the average Joe.
Well, I guess I'm probably more of an educated user. But some of the platforms we're talking about are also my clients, and so I've had the opportunity to do some diligence and get under the hood and understand kind of what the different features are and what the different settings are. And also, I've always been annoyed when I'll go to a big privacy conference and somebody will get up and lecture for an hour about privacy and social media, and through that lecture will say that they never use it. And I say, well, how can you, it's a whole culture, it's a whole way of doing it, it's a whole way of thinking about things. And some people are just kind of too facile or too kind of simplistic about it. Oh, if you use social media, you don't care about your kids these days, they don't care about their privacy. It's like, my son unfriended me on Facebook when he was 14 or something like that. You think, oh, kids don't care about privacy? That was a decision that he made about who his audience was going to be. Yeah. And you talk to kind of kids these days, so my son was that age a long time ago, but kids these days, they're curating what they're putting out there. They're careful about what they're putting out there. In many cases, they have multiple Instagram accounts and multiple Snap accounts and things like that. Because they have an audience of the friends that they want to share their more personal things with, and then they have an audience of their extended family and other things like that. It's too simplistic that they don't care about privacy. They care about privacy all the time. They just might not think of it in terms of caring about privacy. But I don't think I could provide my best advice to a company if I didn't actually use their product or understand their product.
Yeah, there absolutely is.
Or even get myself into the head of who their user is.
Which obviously, as a consumer, that's a huge part of any business, of course. We're going to switch gears here again.
Sure.
You have been a board member of Digital Nova Scotia. Speaking of, digital transformation, all that sort of good stuff. And you've been a board member since...
I think 2002, maybe 2003.
Okay, so that, not to date you by any means, but that's not yesterday. What has your experience been like sitting on the board, as I do believe our longest standing board member?
Yeah, it's been fascinating because when I started to build my practice, so I was called to the bar in 2001, I thought, well, there's this whole technology community in Nova Scotia that I did not know prior to that even existed, and I thought I want to get involved. I want to be there, and so my colleague George Cooper was on the board, or was invited to be on the board. And he said, yeah, no, he'd be happy to, but after he served his term, he wanted me to be there to get exposure to and become a part of the technology community. And it has been fascinating to see, super fascinating and really encouraging to see at least the organization itself, the way that it has grown and the way that it has matured. Like when I first joined the board, there was no staff.
Yeah.
It was the board was doing everything in terms of we had contracted assistants when it came to bookkeeping and other things like that. But it was a small but vital but completely volunteer kind of driven organization. But with a very dedicated group of people who are really, really wanted to see technology flourish in Nova Scotia. And that's always been the case. Every board that I've been a part of, and I regularly say when it's the nominations committee comes to it's like, look, I'll cede my seat to anybody else who you want, and they keep on not firing me. But
and we won't.
But the board has always been composed of really dedicated technology leaders within the community. And it's been great to see much greater diversity with respect to within the community, and within the leadership within the community, and also on the board. There's just so much also diversity of technology companies that when I first started kind of learning what was out there, I thought, well, this is pretty wild. But we did have things that maybe got the most attention in terms of like offshored kind of call center sort of tech support sorts of things, and less emphasis on kind of products that were being made here. And so it's been a complete transformation within the organization. The amount of resources that it is able to bring to bear to actively help the technology community in really meaningful ways in terms of like the training that's being able to. 20 years ago, we never had the resources to do that. We never had the funding to do that, but didn't have the people to do that. And so we were kind of doing our best to help grow the tech sector. And now I see like the Digital Discovery Camp. What an amazing thing. Like that's really kind of heartwarming from day one. And the impact on students, the interaction the organization has been able to have with the universities and the college. But yeah, no, it's amazing to see going from it used to be called the Software Industry Alliance of Nova Scotia, and then it was ITANS, the Information Technology Industry Alliance, and now it's Digital Nova Scotia.
I was going to quiz you, but that's impressive.
Yep. It was ITANS when I joined, but pardon me.
You take your time. You catch your breath.
Yep.
Yeah, you go right ahead.
Just dropped a bit. Yep. Thank you. No problem.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, like I may be in a way a little bit of an archivist of Digital Nova Scotia because I tend to use my inbox as my memory. And so I've saved kind of pretty well every weekly ITANS and Digital Nova Scotia newsletter is still in my inbox. And so there have been times when I've been asked questions by kind of staff or executive directors about, do you know what the origin is? I just kind of go into my inbox and find it right there.
Oh, well, I love that. I mean, we just celebrated in January 36 years, if you can believe that. And I mean, I will just say, David, that the reality is that the organization has grown the way it has because of folks like yourself, whether they be members or dedicated board members. We truly wouldn't be able to offer any of those resources if it weren't for the team beyond our staff team.
Yeah, and it's a virtuous circle. I think that the organization has been able to get where it is by progressively building its credibility and its ability to deliver, which means that more people and funders kind of ask us as the subject matter experts can you put together this program, or we really need to kind of grow this subsector and things like that. And so they know who to call, and they know who will consistently deliver those sorts of results, which means that there's more people available in order to kind of do that. So I guess it's sort of flywheel effect that we've been able to get to the point where we are.
Well, we're certainly really proud to be able to offer those things and to have gotten where we are. And, we've been talking a lot about innovation and what technology will look like down the road. But I think it's exciting to even wonder what a place and a space like Digital Nova Scotia will look like down the road as we constantly evolve.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, we're at the end of our questions. This time has just flown by. Hopefully
I've
you
enjoyed
feel
it very
the same.
much.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. I'm happy to hear that. He's only saying that because he's on camera, folks. It's fine. So at this point in, our episodes, we like to offer, the floor to you. Is there anything, a piece of advice that you'd maybe want to give for, businesses here in the province when it comes to tech law or privacy? Anything, exciting coming down the line at McInnes Cooper or...
Well, sir, we are in a place that is constantly evolving. So Bill C-27 also included a complete overhaul of our privacy laws. And so while artificial intelligence regulation is no longer directly on the table, it's still going to be over the horizon. Like that Europe has done it, Canada is going to do it. What's it going to look like? What does privacy law reform and modernization look like? And so a lot of companies in this sector are going to be affected by that, and they do actually have a voice, and they do have an opportunity to make their voices heard. Their technology associations like Digital Nova Scotia and others. But one really great thing about Nova Scotia is that also our politicians are pretty accessible compared to other places. And we have politicians like we have Senator Colin Deacon, who's a former tech entrepreneur himself, who is really interested in hearing from tech entrepreneurs in order to develop really good public policy. And I think, nobody needs to kind of spend all their time focused on this like I do. But keep it in mind and kind of keep an eye on what's happening in these sorts of areas, because you do want to be able to, if I had a client once told me that kind of if Nova Scotia is your target market, or even Canada is your target market, you're shooting too low. That we need to be thinking about, with digital, you're not moving widgets, you're moving ones and zeros across fiber. It's way easier, and the barriers to that are so much easier. You want to be thinking about, okay, well, if we're going to build this particular product in the med tech space in Canada, is it something that a customer in the U.S. can use? And is it something? And so just kind of keep that on your within your frame of reference and your product design and your roadmap.
That sounds like a much more eloquent way to say, what is it? Shoot for the moon and you'll land on the stars.
Yep.
Yep. David, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really great conversation, one that I was worried I wouldn't have a full understanding of, but you're so great at breaking things down, kind of that tech jargon, that legal jargon, into, lines that folks like myself will actually understand. So thank you very much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Happy to.
Recorded by This Is Marketing, unblanding branding since 2015.